Hey guys, I'm re-uploading this video because it got age restricted and we had a weird audio glitch and I want everyone to be able to see it, so if you've already seen it, feel free to give it another watch, and if not, then please enjoy, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the video. Alright, we're gonna be here for a while. You might as well get cozy. Like and subscribe, join the Discord, the Minecraft server, follow the Instagram. Now let's dive. The entrance to this whole rabbit hole begins with the October the 1st police reporting of the events that evening. Most specifically that Steven had fired over 1,100 rounds into the crowd of concert goers that night, and yet that really can't be true from what we see. Based on the police report photos we do have, there are nowhere near 1,100 bullet casings in that room, and from what we were told, the bullets should have easily landed in a pretty convenient pile for the police to count, and very few, if any, should have fallen outside the window, based on where it is assumed Steven had been standing and shooting from. Therefore, one must ask, why aren't there the appropriate number of bullet casings in the room, and how did the police come to that number? I sure would like to know, but it doesn't seem like the police actually tell us so in their report. Indeed, from my estimation, there are some 400 bullets in all the photos combined of all of Steven's rooms, which would then be roughly 700 shy of what was originally stated that he had fired. So what's going on then? Because along with a lack of shell casings, there is way too much ammunition in Steven's room to make the argument that he was only there for the concert. The final police report states that there were roughly 5,500 rounds of unfired ammunition in Steven's room, which basic math time is about 5 times the number of rounds he had allegedly fired into the crowd. Further, as mentioned, Steven had left a bunch of ammunition in the car, which doesn't make sense either because it won't be much use to you down there if you're up in your hotel room. Furthermore, it's not as though Steven was raided by the SWAT just as his shooting commenced, and he didn't have enough time to finish firing the rest of that ammo, in which case it might make sense why there's so much. In fact, which we briefly touched upon earlier in another episode, Steven had over 72 minutes, as we previously discussed, between when the shooting ended and the SWAT actually entered his room. And based on the impossibly fast fire rate of Steven Paddock that he allegedly showed us that evening, these 72 minutes would have been more than enough time to shoot off the other 5,500 rounds of ammunition. Furthermore, in Paddock's care, they also found over 100 pounds of tannerite. Tannerite being a medium tier explosive that you can buy at a lot of gun stores. And yet he didn't bring that up with him either, or rig a bomb to explode at a certain time. It was literally just sitting there, still in its package from what I could tell. Which makes no sense because why have the tannerite but not be prepared to use it? Fortunately, we do have it on good knowledge that Steven was an arms dealer, as we've covered before, and yet that still brings to mind something that doesn't add up. All of these wasted supplies so neatly packed away in luggage, clearly this was done to make the transfer of goods more expedient and covert, but then why was it left there? That is a question we may never know the answer to, but for our sake, it's probably best it was left there because when you look at the ammo a little bit more deeply, there are some phenomena one might notice. As some types of ammunition would be just plain weird to use if you were plotting a shooting of a concert like Paddock had allegedly been doing. And indeed, once again, Steven will prove to be a very unique man because the robust cache of ammo he had brought with him was red tip, which typically denotes a tracer round. And from what we have seen of the footage from that evening, there are no muzzle flashes nor tracer rounds emanating from Steven's room. To our knowledge, I should say. Especially since, you know, the SWAT says the windows weren't broken.
We do not have a broken window. Okay, stand by. We've got curtains open on a window that's not broken.
But what's further strange is that, say, Steven somehow was shooting through the unbroken windows, well, then that evening should have looked way different. Because this is what a tracer round looks like. And this is what a tracer round looks like at night. And based on the remaining ammo, we can assume that tracers would have been basically all Steven had to shoot. Thus, the evening should have looked much different on camera than it did. And it should have taken the cops no time to find and breach Steven's room. The light that night would have looked like a fireworks show, but lethal. As proving that, Jesus would go on to completely disappear for about a week, bailing without notice on the over 12 interviews on air and written that he had scheduled himself. And after his appearance, he re-emerged only to appear on the Ellen DeGeneres show, of all places, where he gave a very scripted appearing interview where Ellen says his silence was likely purchased by MGM. I'm not going to bore anyone by repeating myself. If you are curious, definitely go check out the first episode. But at the time of researching for that video, what I did not know is that MGM chose to put Jesus Campos on the Ellen DeGeneres DeGenerate Show for a very specific reason. The Ellen Show is, for all intents and purposes, a low-tier quote-unquote comedy show that has zero reason to be hosting such a guest. Or so I thought in my ignorance. But there is no such thing as coincidence, thus putting my ear to the streets, I did some searching, and discovered that, shocker, Ellen is owned by MGM. Explaining why Jesus is on the show, and why he was never asked a question about the changing timeline, or why he was supposedly shot 6 minutes before the gunfire began on the concert, or why he disappeared. He and his colleague, even get free tickets to watch Men in Time. What you mean by MGM owning Ellen? Owns, I should say, I mean in the proverbial sense, as they make a fortune offer. In 2015, they released a whole slew of Ellen DeGenerate themed slot machines that Ellen obviously takes royalties on. Not the sort of thing you want to risk losing out on, both from the casino's perspective and hers. Which would make sense then why MGM chose to have compost on Ellen. She's owned media, won't ask questions, and will help ease the public curiosity about what occurred the night of October the 1st of 2017. But it does get stranger. Her production company, named A Very Good Production, which is just false advertising, was operated at the time of the shooting by a man named Jeff Kleeman. Jeff, however, didn't always work for Ellen. He also spent over a decade working in various production and executive roles at MGM. So it seems that the ties between Ellen and MGM are tighter than we could have imagined. And speaking of odd coincidences as relates to financial incentives, there is an interesting fellow named James Moran, who at the time of the Vegas shooting was the CEO of MGM Resorts International, the parent company of Mandalay Bay and a bunch of other properties. The sort of guy who is in the know about all sorts of things and important event-related information about his company and what's going on at any time, which makes his behavior in the months and weeks prior to the shooting so suspicious. In the midst of a booming rise of MGM stock, where for months the market was bullish, and investors were suggesting this was a great time to buy, the CEO of the company sold off much of his stock which he had accumulated during his time at the helm. Not just a few shares, but 294,150 to be precise, or about 80% of his total ownership of the company. He made about $10 million on this transaction, which is nothing to scoff at. But it's even more curious because that sell-off wasn't just in the midst of an upward growth trajectory, but it was just 23 days before Stephen Paddock allegedly opened fire. The timing, we're not gonna lie, is too exceptional to merely be a coincidence in my mind, especially considering Moran stood to miss out on roughly $1.7 million of stock value had he sold after the shooting. Incriminating for certain, however, it seems that Moran couldn't keep mum on the word and may have let it leak to a bigger fish. George Soros, the embodiment of a demon, the incarnation of evil in the form of a vile, elderly husk. He also happened to be under the impression that MGM Resorts, while in a bullish upward climb, was a worthwhile short position to open. Short meaning he was in essence wagering the price of MGM Resorts International stock was going to drop considerably enough to make a profit on the difference. In fact, he was so confident in this bet that he opened a short position on 1.35 million shares of MGM-RI. Guess what? This position was reported in August, no more than about 60 days prior to the shooting. That many shares at August of 2017 prices makes Soros's position a roughly $42 million one. And as we know, MGM-RI's price did go down shortly afterwards, with Soros collecting a $73 million return on his investment. All of which makes one wonder where these two got their information from. How could they be so confident as to stake tens of millions of dollars on a guess, despite swimming completely against stream on the entire market's opinion about MGM-RI? And it also makes me wonder if they were somehow involved, but that would be ridiculous, right? Stephen Paddock was a man of much wealth and enjoyed traveling, but it seems that he enjoyed going a bit further east than most. Stephen ended up finding himself on cruises to the Middle East. We aren't certain of the dates of these cruises, but we do know that he took at least 20 of them, some of which landed him in Jordan in the United Arab Emirates. An odd connection, sure, considering Stephen would allegedly go on to perpetrate the worst mass shooting in contemporary American history, that ISIS would then go on to claim, and the Saudi royal family was also possibly present in the midst of a civil war, but it's even more so strange since we have on solid evidence that the man was a covert op for the government, specifically engaged in the trafficking of arms, and here's where we're going to take things up to an 11. Stephen Paddock is known in the media as some rando dude who gambled and then got mad and shot up a festival. And I kid you not, some people try and argue that he slipped on the floor of a different casino and that made him so angry that he did this. And that is just lazy, despicable, awful media. And I know I don't want to belabor the point, we've discussed that a lot, but it's just too ignorant. But it's even more despicable because apparently the evidence has been right before our eyes. One bit of evidence that proves Stephen Paddock was a government agent in the most incriminating way possible. Truly the only thing that could be more incriminating incriminating than this would be if maybe a presidential assassin had a picture taken of him with the weapon in question after the event, had socialist papers in his hand, and the photo had apparently been heavily edited. That would be maybe more incriminating than this, which certainly that's not possible. And so on screen now, I'm going to show you a letter written from one client of Stephen Paddock's to a prospective client of Stephen Paddock's. And this letter is supposed to be a reference letter for Stephen so he can get a new contract of some kind. And so I'm just gonna read it now and then give you my thoughts. Mr. Jim Nixon, America's Attorney Service, Inc. P.O. Box 80094, Balch Spring, Texas 75108. RE Accounting Service. Dear Mr. Nixon, please note that I have been working with Mr. Paddock for the past several years and believe that he will be the ideal accountant / investor for your business. Steve have a very unique accounting practice and he is very professional, not to mention honest. 15 years with the CIA, he is funny and will keep you happy as long as you are his client. In other words, I have nothing but good to say about Steve. I realize you've only known Steve for about 3 to 5 years in a personal manner, but professionally you will be impressed. Steve talks a lot about his CIA days, but he is a good person to know and will work for you. Please give him a chance. Sincerely, Mr. Albert Stockton. Firstly, how insane. This has just been sitting here and almost no one knows about this letter. And secondly, I think we can all understand that Stephen Paddock is probably not going to be doing much accounting or investing, and this letter is tongue-in-cheek. And it's pretty clearly, in my mind, referencing something else that Stephen is going to be accounting for and investing in, which I believe is further proven by the huge kahuna that this letter reveals to us. Right there, a close friend of Stephen Paddock and client references more than once that Stephen Paddock has been a CIA operative. Even crazier that he worked there for 15 plus years and often spoke about his experiences. Now this doesn't seem right at all. We have a mass shooter who in reality from what we know now is an arms dealer, which we could sort of tell already based on his previous work history and disappearance, but it's good to know because there was that inconvenient blank spot that left so much up in the air where he just had no work history for like 30 years, which now at least 15 years of has been filled up with his time at the CIA. And so we must wonder, is this why the media was so silent about Paddock, why they didn't take advantage of the gun control narrative? Because the feds knew he was one of their own and were trying to hide it from us? And it was so obviously seen in a bunch of letters that the government already had, so then why were they only released 2 years ago? And why did I have to get linked to them on a random Reddit thread that then linked me to a random local news channel that only showed this letter for about 4 seconds in the overall context of letters telling Stephen not to shoot? Which I can't really tell if any of them actually even say that. So how is this possible? To my knowledge, I haven't seen it in any of the records I've sifted through. So what obscure government report or release did this get pulled from? I suppose at least now we have undeniable confirmation that Paddock is a Fed, but still, what the heck and how deep does this go? Typically, when you work for the government, you're a glorified wagee, but Stephen was anything but. In some way or another, his career in the weapons industry and CIA influenced him enough to rise to such a level that he became a multi-millionaire many times over. And with his excess wealth, he acquired millions in real estate, but also 2 planes. And these 2 planes reveal far more than they should, or far more than the powers that be may want us to know. I found a good post that summarizes just about everything in relation to this, and so I'll read it and then we'll back it up and prove it from there. Another question you might want to ask, if you looked at the website flightaware.com and search a tail number, in this case N5343M, you will notice that the N number belongs to a SR20, that at one time it was registered to Stephen C. Paddock of Mesquite in Henderson, Nevada, our shooter. You will also see that it is currently registered to a company out of Roanoke, Virginia named Volant LLC, a company that works with the defense intelligence community per their website. Wait, it gets better. The registration is listed as active. Don't worry that it shows the last flight of the aircraft 3 years ago. They only show the flight when a flight plan is filed. FlightAware pulls their data directly from the FAA registration database, so it should be accurate, correct? Now that's the interesting part. If you go to FAA.gov and put the same tail number into their search engine, N5343M, you'll find that the FAA says the N number is inactive, and the last registration was a C-152, different aircraft, to some guy in San Diego, California, and no mention of the current registration by Volant LLC or Mr. Paddock. The FAA database is updated every business day at midnight, so it looks like someone either scrubbed the FAA database and forgot, or didn't know that FlightAware posted the same info, or someone at FlightAware is playing a big trick on everyone and putting false information into their database. All I know is the name Stephen C. Paddock now has something in common with a spook outfit. Interesting. This sounds outlandish, but it isn't. The Paddock government connections do continue to get deeper, but something this post leaves out is that Volant LLC and Volant Associates, which which is what it's referencing, are two different companies technically. One might be tempted to combine them because Volant LLC is, from what I can tell, a shell company, and Volant Associates is a defense contractor with the same name. And the odds of these two companies sharing the same name, that being a French word which is a military term, while being a few hour drive apart, or way less than that by plane, since we are discussing planes, is about nil in my mind. But let's scrutinize this claim a bit more and see if it holds up. First, let's view the registration address for this Volant LLC. It pulls up a house in Virginia, just some random house, not an office. It does sometimes happen that you'll list your business address as your home address. It's not altogether common when seeking some sort of privacy, but it's possible. However, this house is particularly curious. You can't get very close via Google Earth or any other Street View app I've found. The closest you can get is still pretty distant, and there are some conveniently planted trees that obstruct the view of anyone trying to peep the house from the back road. Nonetheless, we can see some curious things considering this home is connected to a war contractor and therefore the government. That being two very similar looking black cars, at least two sizable outbuildings, in addition to a pretty big home with windows that we can't look into, and also what I believe to be a relatively large satellite sitting behind some trees in the backyard. That would be easy to miss. It's also a nice piece of property set a bit back off the road with few neighbors in line of sight, especially considering the trees. I find this all a little too strange to pass up, but it does get weirder. When looking up the address online, it reveals that it's not actually a home, my bad, but a French restaurant named Charles L. Doing a little look-see-loo, Charles L. is not a restaurant, let alone a French one, but it's apparently the name of a doctor, and looking up said doctor, we get the following information. Mr. Charles L. CNA specializes in certified nurse anesthetist in Roanoke, Virginia, and has over 31 years of experience in the field of medicine. Just realized that sentence does not make sense. He graduated from his medical school with his medical degree in 1994. He is affiliated with numerous hospitals in Virginia and more, including Grandstand Regional Medical Center. Mr. Charles L. is licensed to practice by the State Board of Virginia. Mr. Charles L. also practices at Roanoke, Virginia. He is accepting new patients as medical office and is available for appointments, preventative care, medical care, as well as ongoing patient care. When reading that, I realized that there are a lot more errors than I had noticed the first time. But without giving out any personals, I just want to say that none of what was told is possible or really makes sense. Firstly, the phone number given is real, but it's not for a doctor living in Roanoke, but it's the name of a man in his late 70s who lives in North Carolina, which is a little under 200 miles away, and who is certainly not a doctor from what I can tell. And because I'm really creepy and I wanted to make sure this wasn't some connection I've missed, I know he's been in the same home in North Carolina since 2015, meaning over a decade, and yet this other Charles, who has the same phone number apparently, the doctor in Virginia, is supposedly still taking clients and you can call him right now. That phone number though obviously won't go to a doctor. Admittedly, this is all weird, but so is the fact that the exact same description for this doctor appears across most references to his name online. A major red flag suggesting we are possibly looking at a dummy identity, and Charles the doctor is Charles the fake. Or a massive interstate coincidence is at play, but I doubt that considering he is allegedly practicing out of a very clearly not up to medical code house, and the home is listed everywhere as his business address as well and suggests that he's practicing from there. He's also not the sort of doctor who can work on patients from his house for at least a dozen reasons, but most prominently because if he turns the knob a little bit too much, you go into a permanent night-night. But I digress. Getting back on track, taking his little blurb and researching it across the internet, we find at face value that the records are just scuffed. The doctor's name that has been appropriated appears on a registry for anesthesiologists, and it brings to a doctor with a matching name and identification number, but this one got his certification in 2006. And from the small blurb we get about the Charles who's registered to the address for the business that purchased Stephen Paddock's plane, he got his certification 12 years prior in 1994. A pretty big mistake to miss when building an identity online. Also, a major tell was that they did not even name the school that this doctor originally graduated from. Most people brag about that stuff, especially doctors. I mean, they did spend 14 years getting this degree in a lot of cases, and at the very least, it gives them a lot of credibility. After all, I don't want my doctor graduating from the school of my neighbor's front lawn. But the issue with giving a school when creating a fake identity is that you open yourself up for the chance of someone cross-referencing you against yearbooks and enrollment lists, and very quickly proving that you're a liar. Hopefully I'm not yapping too much on this, but this is one of the most dead to rights bits of evidence in this whole case. Clearly, if the company that shares the same name as the defense contractor located not too far away is actually registered to a fake dude whose fake office is out of a house with black cars, a large satellite, and a bunch of outbuildings in a private area of a private neighborhood with a lot of trees, the chances of the two companies are one and the same is extremely high. Sorry, I want to see if I can get that in one try. But that's not the only strange thing about this plane. If you were to look deeper, you'll notice that the only known flight for this N number, which is the plane's identification number, was in 2014, 3 years before the shooting. One might ask then, what is the purpose of purchasing a plane and then not flying it? and I have a similar thought about that. What's interesting though is that we don't have to look very far to find out. Once again, if we follow the references given to us in this post, which are surprisingly great for a comment on Blogspot no less, if we continue under the notion that Paddock is involved with the companies closely or directly tied to war contractors in the government, we're going to have a solid heading. For when we look up the plane's N number on the FAA database, something happens. For context, every flight is logged at an airport the moment it's registered. That information is then sent to an FAA database, who every day at midnight will update the log information. This is true and consistent with what the post said. I actually went and looked it up. And this is how we know that the only flight for this plane occurred in 2014. And we can see a visual example of this on the Flight Aware database, which collects its data from the main FAA database. However, the FAA database shows that there is something strange going on, because they report that the plane Stephen Paddock owned and what is ostensibly owned by a doctor now had its flight number deregistered. Yet that's impossible, because we know that the plane was flown in 2014 and afterward under the same call sign. And therefore what I imagine occurred is that the Flight Aware site managed to secure the data on the plane and log it on its own site, probably shortly after midnight the day of the flight, when the FAA pulls all of its data together. And the FAA, knowing this plane was intended for covert purposes, likely went to scrub said data on its platform shortly after receiving it, but it was too late for the automatic update that happens on Flight Aware's end. Or I imagine happens on their end, I should say, leaving us with a pretty interesting trail. It's also worth noting that if you look up the N number today on the FAA website, you are met with this screen. Further, it does seem like this post is correct, and the FAA data doesn't even match the correct plane and plane model, which is a whole nother issue. I really wish I could say it ended there, but it doesn't. The whole host of people who own this plane between Paddock and quote-unquote Valant LLC are weird. One of them can be tied all the way back to an obscure LLC that has connections to hired guns domestically and abroad, and the other has a similar rigmarole to the first we discussed. I do think though it's not worth to jump down that rabbit hole, because it would only come out as repetitive. But it's important to note that evidently the plane just sat during this time, according to official records, unused. And one of the people who owns it is a businessman placing foreign students in housing. Take that as you may. And from his records, I saw the annual revenue for his business is around $250,000, which, assuming that's accurate, is nothing to scoff at. But his take-home pay is probably not nearly sufficient to fund the acquisition of Paddock's plane, which price ranges from $250,000 to $750,000. A little steep for him based on our records, but also not sure how you could really count that as a business expense unless something else is going on. Once again, some basic facts that raise some important questions. I'm going to try and speed through this because this rabbit hole goes so deep. Stephen Paddock is tied to what some estimate to be at least 100 different registered businesses, and from what I can tell, these are shell companies. Interestingly, basically all of these companies have since shifted ownership, many to the same handful of people, and seem to have skated by untouched by the legal system in the retribution process for the Vegas victims. The companies range just about as broadly as one can imagine. I've seen some that claim to be involved in media consulting and web development, and others that are in the water moving business. The websites for these companies, if they even bother to make one, are comically bogus. The same can be said for many of the LinkedIn profiles allegedly behind them as well. It seems Paddock wasn't very creative, naming 25 different companies Paradise Ranch. Legit, Paradise Ranch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. I don't know what this entails beyond the fact that having a good info, Paddock is at minimum a Fed with CIA work history who sells arms. We should be plenty suspicious, and a bunch of shell companies is the sort of things you do in this business. You know, that being from my decades of experience in international arms dealing. And that's all pretty easy to believe stuff, considering the evidence we have is really supportive for that. But where I've seen people go off the deep end and where I think there's actually been some injection of fake news is if you look a little bit deeper. I don't personally believe this next part, but it's worth noting because of the following reasons. Paradise Ranch, which Paddock named so many of his companies after, is a nickname many officials and employees use for Area 51. And Area 51 is a less than 2-hour drive from his house, and based on his plane capabilities, around an hour flight. Additionally, there is a NASA scientist who published articles on a variety of topics, including rocket propulsion, and was involved in Operation Slingshot. And this scientist's name, you might have guessed it, is Stephen Paddock, but it's a different spelling across various articles. And this turns out to be a red herring though, I truly believe, because it's by all accounts a different man. I've even seen a photo of the guy. Like I said though, name differences, and he's way too old. And so I think this was intentionally added to really skirt you away from where we need to be focused. Now that was all quite convoluted, and I hope it wasn't too confusing, and to some degree I'm still trying to work out a lot of this myself and what it could really mean. But if it was confusing, then I do apologize, because we're gonna have to go a layer deeper here. Paddock's girlfriend, baby mama, whatever you want to call her, is one of the most suspicious characters in this entire event, who's gotten very, very little attention, criminally little attention I might add. Mary Lou Danley was one of Paddock's many women over the years, including at least 2 wives, and yet seemingly little is known about her. From the start, one would anticipate she had been topping the charts for any investigation into the Vegas shooting, but she really wasn't. And the main excuse that has been given for why she was never really investigated very deeply is that she was in the Philippines at the time of the incident. Not altogether surprising because Paddock frequently visited there with and without Mary Lou. But on the off chance we could cast some doubt on if she were actually abroad at the time of the shooting, we could then get some answers to some other loose ends that this case has presented, specifically those relating to the mysterious woman that Stephen had added to his reservation at the MGM Mandalay Bay. 3 women to be precise, all of whose names have been redacted, as well as allegedly a hooker, but I think more and more that hooker connection might just be a red herring. It would also answer how Stephen Paddock was able to get a room comp to him with Mary Lou's points while she's on the other side of Earth, and apparently even using her card and ID. I don't think you would typically be able to do that, nor would Stephen, the man who was such a high roller. His brother says he got an entire floor of the Atlantic Casino in Reno, Nevada for his family to stay in. I doubt that guy would also need his baby mama's few points to get what is a relatively inexpensive suite compared to where he was actually staying. Getting back on track, there's a substantial reason to believe that Mary Lou may have been in Vegas for the shooting despite official reports. The reason I suspect this to be a possibility is that at minimum 2 eyewitnesses report seeing Mary Lou, or at least someone who looks very much like her, in the days prior to the Vegas incident. These reports were taken by the police, but to the best of my knowledge, not really investigated. The first report reads as follows: I got a request to pick up Paddock at terminal number 1 pickup area for Uber. Not sure what day or time. I pick up a man and women with a big blue suitcase, and looking and heard he commented on the Mandalay Bay area for a terrorist attack and dropped at the Mandalay Bay. P.S. Maybe check Uber's records. Now that is a little curious, and the next post reads as follows. At least 2 people told police they saw Mary Lou Danley or someone matching her description in the days prior to the shooting. A waitress at the noodle shop said she recognized Paddock and Danley from the news, but she paid more attention to Danley when she reported seeing the couple eating together on September 29th. I just joking around with the hostess and I tell her, I bet that lady's Filipina. She said, I don't focus on him too much. I was looking that lady. You know, women, we criticize each other sometime from far away. She looked so young, but when you get close, that's why I recognize her in the picture because she got the white hair. I would say this is what we refer to as a wrench, and it tosses nicely into the wheels of this entire investigation that the police conducted. It makes me think it should be a requirement for the feds to release all the evidence unredacted, because I don't think we can quite take their word on what happened in this incident. For instance, where's a copy of the boarding pass or an itinerary of any kind showing Mary Lou Danley actually went to the Philippines, or maybe some photos she took while she was there? I'd be so grateful to see it all. But there is something else, and I wonder if you noticed it. The eyewitness testimony states clearly that Paddock and what we presume may have been Mary Lou Danley were picked up from the airport and then taken to the Mandalay Bay, which is totally different from the story that Paddock drove to the Mandalay Bay from his home in Mesquite. And so we have a few possibilities. We've been lied to, and Paddock did not drive to the Mandalay Bay from his home, or Paddock did drive to the resort, but for some reason Ubered back to the airport and then Ubered back to the resort. Or the other reason I can think of is that he went to pick someone up, but that wouldn't explain why he didn't just take his car. So it's all very strange. And in either instance, it requires us to ask, what was with Paddock? After all, it can't be denied someone arrived at the Mandalay Bay with him from the airport. A woman who, based on other descriptions, may have been the same woman who arguably knew the most about him, that being Mary Lou Danley. The woman who, in her own words, warned the police that her fingerprints might pop up on the bullets because she had helped load them into the magazines, which is beyond ridiculous. One other possibility is that maybe she was in the Philippines and then came back early, or literally was just never there at all and came late, especially considering now that there is solid evidence she may have been a full-throated Fed. The FBI. The garage was empty, and the neighbors report seeing the 2 packing up their cars at various times as if they were moving, but when asked, they said they had no intentions of moving. They always had their blinds down, and they were all around weird people. Mary Lou was very kind, but Paddock was put offish. This is practically speaking the sentiment shared by all of the neighbors' testimonies I have encountered who knew Mary Lou Danley or Paddock to some regard prior to the incident. And the strangeness is just going to be emblematic for the story of Mary Lou, who, despite media reports, is not quite as normal as we might think. She's around about 70 now, and her history is nearly as murky as Paddock's, but we do know that she was born in the Philippines on December 12th of 1954. She then moved to Australia, already having a child when she arrived. We don't know if this was from another husband or out of wedlock. While in Australia, she marries a man, either first or second husband, we don't know, but seemingly got tired of him and left in the late 1980s when she moved to Arkansas, which is quite a long way from Australia. And while there, she married a man whose name I shall leave out because I feel really awful for him. And this was in the year 1990. She also brought her daughter with her as well to America. The daughter of the original man, presumably in the Philippines, who we don't know whether or not she was wed to. But getting back to Arkansas, the family, which included her husband's own daughters, moved to Memphis and then Nevada. And in 2013, while still married to this man, she started committing adultery for the second or third or maybe fourth time, I'm not really sure at this point, with who we now know as Stephen C. Paddock. But here's where it's going to get even more confusing. Reports from neighbors about Mary Lou prior to meeting Paddock state that she was a great wife and mom, as mentioned, during this period. Yet somehow, while being a wife and mom in Nevada, Mary Lou is also a high-limit poker hostess at the Atlantis Casino in Reno, Nevada. I'm not even certain if she lived near that casino, and it's an over 7-hour drive from Paddock's home in Mesquite. So that's just odd. And this is allegedly where she would meet Stephen Paddock while being a hostess in the high-limit poker room. And we do know that Paddock did visit this casino, and we know that he once even got the entire floor comped for his family, which is just an insane thing to think about. And knowing Mary Lou hops from man to man like it's an Olympic sport, or like a frog on lily pads on a rainy day, that seems like the sort of thing that would attract her attention. But something just doesn't smell right about all of this. Mary Lou has all of these husbands and baby daddies and multiple citizenships, and seemingly knew what Paddock was up to the night of the shooting. She kind of gives away the whole bag by privating and then deleting her Facebook account the night of the shooting prior to Stephen being announced as the culprit. So nah, something more is going on. And so I dug a little bit more and got this gem you're not going to find anymore. But if you were to search for Mary Lou around 2017 on a database for employers named Intellius, which is a background check of sorts, Mary Lou had a profile that the system had generated that seemingly gave accurate names and related addresses, but among these names it did accurately include her previous husband before dating Paddock. In addition to that, the site also included this pesky detail that while working at the Atlantis Casino, she was allegedly involved in working for the FBI as well, which What? That seems like a pretty big deal to me. Indeed, assuming the data is correct, which for all intents and purposes, I can believe because the other data seems to be correct, then this would be a pretty hard fact to circumnavigate, and it would make her history a little bit more logical. It's not easy to become the citizen of 3 countries and maintain an extremely low profile, to the point the only real information that's available about you online is scant to nil prior to Paddock allegedly popping off in that hotel room. And it does suggest, in my opinion, that Mary Lou may have known the shooting was going to occur and was perhaps there considering her identification card was used to comp the room, allegedly to Stephen. And her fingerprints being on the bullets, come on bro, something else is up here. And it also makes me a bit more confident in my summations because the sources for this information about the FBI connection have basically been scrubbed from the internet, and this Wayback Archive of it has 21 views as of writing, so hopefully we can get a couple more eyes on that thing. The next one we have gone pretty in depth to in part 2, but I think this article is worth including because it really just speaks for itself. Investigators probing whether others were in Las Vegas gunman's suite. Woo, shocker. Investigators are trying to nail down whether anyone else was in the hotel suite reserved by the Las Vegas gunman during the time he was registered there. Multiple senior law enforcement officials briefed on the investigation into the shooting told NBC News. The investigators are puzzled by 2 discoveries. First, a charge was found that does not match any of the cell phones that belonged to Stephen Paddock, the man who killed himself inside the Mandalay Resort and Casino after sending a barrage of bullets down on a crowd of 22,000 people below. I would also like to take a moment and interrupt this article to state that Stephen Paddock had 7 different cell phones in his hotel room. Definitely not the typical boomer. Continuing with the article though, it says that in second, garage records show that a period when Paddock's car left the hotel garage, one of his key cards was used to get into his room. Hotel staff, in their own words, admit to visiting Paddock's room 10 separate times, including one instance where they brought a second fridge to his room. But they didn't notice anything strange in their own words. And that little ditty about the fridge comes from the LVMPD's final report on the matter, which, considering the horrors of that night and the mystery surrounding it, 178 pages seems a little light for a final report, so come on guys, get your numbers up. In addition to that, Paddock actually called the hotel staff to his adjoining room, comped to his baby mama's name, and reported that there was a smell and it needed to be freshened up. The staff member reported later to the police that he had seen no luggage in the room, a far cry from what it would look like the night of the shooting. A fact that most don't know about Stephen Paddock is that he possessed 2 laptops in his room. One was hooked up to the camera system he had monitoring the inside and outside of his room, and the other seemed to be used for business affairs. Hotel staff report seeing Paddock working from one of them, but from what I can tell, they didn't see the other. The feds, upon entering Paddock's room that night, noticed that one of his laptops is sitting on the bed and the other is on the floor missing its hard drive. What most media outlets I've read, though, don't report is that it had also been disassembled, the entire computer, which suggests a pretty advanced understanding of computers in a relatively specific tool set. Keep this in mind for what I tell you next. On Paddock's other computer, the police claim to find a hard drive full of images of children. I won't go any further, just let that one sink in. In addition to this, on Paddock's browser, he just so happened to have over a dozen search queries for the police to look at conveniently, of which were seeking information about venues that overlooked event centers. Convenient, I say, as well as a search query for where the hard drive is in the Dell E5570 laptop, the computer Paddock was supposedly using. This whole story in mind, that should strike you as a pretty convenient narrative. You find the shooter who was advanced enough to disassemble his one computer and remove the hard drive, but is super confused on how to do it to another, which also appears to be the same computer. I don't know. Fat chance of that to me. Also, if you were, as the prevailing narrative goes, conducting the shooting because you were bored with life and knew you were most likely not going to make it out of this thing alive, then why would you go to the effort of removing your hard drive and disassembling your computer? You're likely going to be deceased anyway, so why would you care then? Moreover, if you did feel the need for some reason to destroy evidence, I would think the kitty pics would be the first to go. But since they weren't, I'm left to suspect that maybe the even more incriminating information was on the other computer and the other hard drive, in my mind, perhaps linking the feds directly to him. I don't know, but it seems that once again, whoever was in charge here was an absolute amateur hour because they didn't even bother to do a good job covering this up. The feds tell us that there were 2 laptops that were found, one disassembled lying on the floor and one on the bed. The story then changes and there's 3 laptops now, one on the bed, another plugged into the camera system and sitting on the room service cart, and a third in a random area of the room, in their words, now broken and in a bag with empty boxes of ammo. So there's 3 computers now, or 2, but this third one isn't disassembled on the floor, it's broken in a bag. It might be easy to assume that this is mixed up with the one that's disassembled, but that's not the same thing at all. Disassembled is the intentional taking apart of an item, broken is destruction. There's a difference, and I would expect the police to understand that difference when describing a crime scene. The report then seems to be refuting itself, because now I'm starting to think that there might be 4 computers, the 2 intact ones, the one disassembled one on the floor, and the other broken one in the bag. So what's going on then? Also, the computer that Paddock had searched how to remove the hard drive from is the computer the police allegedly found all these images and evidence on, from what I can tell. So Paddock knew how to remove the hard drive then from the computer and disassemble one of his computers off the dome and had the supplies to do it, but had to look up how to do it for the other one. Okay, fine, let's just say he had to look it up. Then why then, after doing said research, does he decide that, I don't care, let him just find whatever they want on my laptop? Like, what? Huh? What? At this point, I don't think the police actually expected anyone to read what they wrote because it's got more holes than Swiss cheese, which is likely why at no time does anyone explain where Stephen's hard drive is then if it's not in the computer or in the hotel room. The man disassembled the computer shortly before the shooting, or possibly right afterwards, we don't know. So then, are we to believe that the hard drive unscrewed itself from the computer and walked off? And if the evidence on there was so unimportant to the police that they didn't even ask where it went, then why did Eric Paddock, Stephen's brother and real estate pal, tweak out when questioned by the police? Here are a few quotes from that quote-unquote interview. Eric was upset with Paddock until he learned Paddock had removed the hard drives of the computers found in the hotel room. Eric was upset because Paddock had completed the taxes for the family and had cheated on them. Eric was afraid the hard drives would implicate him and his mother for tax evasion. Upon learning the hard drives were missing, Eric said several times, maybe he, parentheses, Paddock, did care for us. Gonna interject here. Why did you give away that he was evading taxes? They didn't have the proof. You just incriminated yourself. So I don't really think that's the reason, or at least not that main one. And another quote I picked out for you reads as follows. Eric felt Paddock cared deeply for Danley and would do whatever possible to help take care of her. Eric expressed anger over the possibility of Danley having access to his monetary assets. Eric referred to Danley as a gold digger. Like I said, I do wonder then if this was some simple creative accounting that was occurring on those computers that Eric was so mad about, or if he knew something else was going on them, and that was the real reason he was so fussy. After all, Eric Paddock, in his own words, was not quite the fan of the feds. Eric told investigators he and Paddock were smarter than the majority of other people. Eric told investigators he was in Las Vegas to help and show how dumb you
Didn't Bush worship Satan?
are, referring to law enforcement. Eric believed Paddock would have planned out every part of the attack methodically. Paddock would have a need for everything found in the room. Despite appearing unkempt and in poor health, Paddock was very detail-oriented. This is one of those areas where I just wish I could be a fly on the wall or have an actual honest investigation or reporting, because this report should be thousands of pages of long and cover every single inch of the event and every word spoken in every interview, but we barely get any information, and the interviews we are reading from are paraphrased, meaning who knows what was actually said, especially since this report from Eric Paddock and several other family members' interviews are only composites of multiple interviews, so the entire thing just stinks even more. But hey, at least we got sentient hard drives that disappear themselves when the feds get too close, or it was purloined, whatever you choose to believe. Either way, a literal manhunt should have occurred to recover that hard drive and should still be occurring. The snorkel. I don't know what else to say about this except that Stephen Paddock, amongst his arsenal, also had what the police have called a snorkel. I think it's jerry-rigged, not manufactured, and it's another detail that makes less than 0 sense in this case. Unless Stephen wanted to go snorkeling at a coral reef in downtown Las Vegas Strip in the middle of a desert, then some explaining needs to be done about that. We're on the home stretch now. What few appreciate or can appreciate about this case are how weird the actual photos of Paddock's body are. I happen to have several of them on my computer just for this. And they are in fact out there online if you were very, very curious, and the unblurred pictures of his head and body are specifically there. And for obvious reasons, I'm not going to show that here. So I thought the creative way to do this would be to draw what I'm referring to for you guys, but I don't want you to judge because I'm not an artist, okay? So if you were to pull up Paddock's body, there are a few things you may notice. One, bro has 2 separate bloodstains coming from his noggin. The first looks hours old and is dried into the carpet for the most part, while there's another one that has seemingly formed recently, pulling out of him over top the other dried blood stain. This isn't possible to my knowledge unless something fishy is afoot, but fish don't have feet, which makes me even further suspicious. One may also notice that there is a bloodstain on Stephen Paddock's chest. I can't find a top-down angle of it, but it does look like another GSW, which would require us to ask some more questions. After all, there's only one family that's allowed to have friends perish to multiple self-inflicted gunshot wounds without investigation. Paddock's foot is also seen resting under a gun that is gently set over his leg on its bipod. Pretty hard to move your leg under there after taking your life. Paddock is wearing gloves that just seems weird to me. Fingerprints shouldn't be a concern if the prevailing narrative were true that this is just a shooter and not a gun deal. And if it's for the heat, then these probably aren't the best gloves. But if you were an arms dealer and you were seeking to keep your prints off the evidence, then this would be a great way to do it. There's also a random third glove sitting on the counter, and I wonder if this is missing its friend and if it's with whoever else was in that room that evening and throughout Paddock's stay in Las Vegas. Additionally, Paddock's lying on top of another firearm, which I just find to be so strange. The gun that allegedly allowed Stephen to transmit the bullet through his noggin, as we discussed last episode, is several feet behind him, and that doesn't make any sense. It's also got a trail of blood leading to Paddock and what looks like a fingerprint on it, or someone had touched it in some way. Oh yeah, and Stephen Paddock was 6'3" and well over 200 pounds, and this body doesn't look remotely like that. And more interesting, what remains of Stephen's face and head don't, in my opinion, look much like Stephen. But what do I know? Okay, toodles! Boom, we're done. There it is, the Vegas series. All in all, everything I think I wanted to say. There are some details, so if you guys are, I can't even offer that. There are other details, but I think that's all the major stuff that we hit. So I want to quickly say thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, you're an absolute, I don't even know what to call you. Legend just seems like an understatement. So for now, I guess we'll just say you're an absolute legend. Thank you so very much. It really does mean the world to me. Specific shout out right now to everyone on the Patreon. We've gained a ton of new members, and I want you to know that it means a lot to me. You guys really make this whole thing possible. Specific shout out to Paul, who's just a huge carry on there. Like we always say, the Prince of Patreon. And then I also want to say thank you to everyone for following the Instagram and for all the growth in the channel. For playing on the Minecraft server, make sure to check that out. And for everyone on the Discord server, thank you to the whole new mod team. You know I see you guys and it means a lot. And that being said, I think that's everything. Remember though, oh, how could I forget? If you don't hear from me and I disappeared into the woods, you find out, or somehow I slipped and fell or off a ledge or drowned or something like that, I just want it to be known that I can swim. There's no power cord in the home. I don't typically use a toaster in the bathtub. I'm not a big heights guy, so you're not gonna find me on top of a skyscraper and just randomly slip on a rainy day. None of that. I just wanted to put that out there for no specific reason, but I, once again, like I said, really appreciate you guys for being here and for the support on the channel. I hope you guys are really enjoying this. And if you made it this far, you should hype the video. I don't know what it does, but it sounds kind of cool, so make sure to do that. And yeah, all in all, doing great, and I appreciate every single one of you guys. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see each and every one of you in the next one.